He disagrees without providing any evidence. The only people, I said 40 million, 30, 40 million are not treated and they're doing well. It's the people who are getting these drugs that are inevitably toxic. They are designed to terminate DNA synthesis. That's the central molecule of life. You're dying from that. That is AIDS by prescription. And 500,000 people are prescribed these drugs alone in the US. And all of them now die, about half of them die from diseases that have nothing to do with HIV, that have never been attributed to it.
Before we go to the break, I'd like to go to Steve. Excuse me, Professor, excuse me. I'd like to go to Steve in New Haven here. The professor is essentially saying that the companies that you represent are killing their patients.
That's what I'm saying. The drugs are AIDS by prescription.
No, Professor, let's listen to what Steve has to say here. Go ahead.
I would say that Professor Duesberg's opinions on the good side are disrespectful, and on the worst side are tantamount to murder. I just want to say that when three-drug therapy was introduced in 1996, we were able to see a decrease in AIDS-related deaths after 4 years of 84%. So that's doing exactly the opposite of what he's saying. The drugs were not killing people. They actually have made an enormous impact on saving people's lives. Since 1996...
Steve, I'm going to have to jump in. I'm going to have to jump in here, gentlemen. After a short break, we'll continue our discussion on AIDS. Stay with RT. Welcome back to CrossTalk. I'm Peter Lavelle. To remind you, we're talking about the business around HIV/AIDS. But before, let's see what Russians think about the government's efforts to deal with this problem.
Convening under the slogan "Right Here, Right Now," the 18th International AIDS Conference gathers 20,000 people from 185 countries, representing scientific, civil society, academic, and government communities. Over 33 million people live with HIV. This is according to the UN's latest figures, and about 1 million of them are in Russia. The Russian Public Opinion Research Center asks citizens if the Russian government pays enough attention to the HIV/AIDS problem. Opinion is divided. 44% say government does enough to prevent the disease and to keep people informed about it. 43% of the respondents say not enough effort is being made to tackle the problem. Peter?
Okay, I'd like to go back to Steve in New Haven. You were making a point about, in reacting to what the professor had to say, is he's saying that some of the drugs that are being developed are actually hurting their patients, even killing them, and you're defending the industry. And in researching this program, there is a debate, though there's a very small minority, and the professor is one of them, that these drugs are very counterproductive, and actually it's creating more and more drugs to just keep the process going. It's good business. I mean, that's one of the criticisms.
You know, this brings me back to the mid-'80s when I was a consultant to Burroughs Wellcome, which was the company that introduced the first AIDS drug, AZT. And we would go out to interview people and talk to them about sometimes their hesitancies in taking the drug. And we now know that AZT is an incredibly toxic drug, and most people try not to prescribe it when they don't need to. But we heard back then, especially from African Americans, that they thought that the drug had been created by the U.S. government in order, as a type of genocide. And, you can understand where opinions like that came from when people are coming home, taking this drug, having all kinds of horrible reactions, and people around them are seeing this and saying, well, I don't want any part of that. But, we're 25 years from that. We're not in the mid-'80s anymore. And, so while there may have been some suppositions that could have existed to support Dr. Duesberg's theories back then, let's deal with what we know now. The drug companies have made these drugs a lot less toxic. They have gotten the formulations down to the point where now we're about to see 4 drugs introduced in a single pill once a day. That's never been existent before. We have very exciting new findings, such as Dr. Brune just mentioned with the tenofovir gel, which is cutting incidence of contracting HIV in half by people who use it correctly.
Denise, would you say maybe, and we can say more broadly, is there a wide debate within the discussion about how to deal with AIDS? Because there will be people like the professor that we have in the program, and people that support him, saying that there is no debate allowed in this endeavor. How would you describe that? Is there a debate on how things should be done, or is it just so closed and narrow now that other voices can't be heard?
Oh, I mean, any voice can be heard. I think people are free to express any type of opinion. We must be careful that people do not express opinions which are dangerous to patients. So we have seen in Russia some religious fundamentalists denying that there would be any HIV, and it was God's punishment that had to be accepted by the patients. We don't think it's a way of having a constructive relationship with people living with HIV and helping them in their fight against the disease. I consider, unfortunately, Professor Duisberg's opinion of being of the same vein. What is clear in this conference here in Vienna, we have more than 20,000 people, and I can tell you there's a very lively debates happening all the time with demonstrations and a lot of opinions expressed, but no one is saying anything like denying the role of HIV in creating AIDS or saying that the drugs are dangerous for people. Actually, there's really a kind of a universal movement to make sure that people access treatment. It's what saves them.
Professor, if we can go back to Mannheim, how do you react to that? Is there a lively debate, a lively discussion on how to deal with this virus? Because in preparing for this program, you're not the most liked person when it comes to this field of endeavor.
There is indeed one right now discussion, as you can hear from Steve and Dennis. They're calling everything I'm saying Duisberg's opinions. But I'm relying on the toxicity of the antiviral drugs, on studies that have been published, so-called controlled studies in the New England Journal of Medicine, in the Lancet more recently, the Concord study, that has used AZT, the same drug that he now admits is a little less toxic than it used to be. That was not by Africans, that was reported by an Anglo-French study in the Lancet, the oldest medical journal, that it would increase mortality 25% compared to untreated people, and that it was not recommended as a drug to prevent AIDS, and that is how it is prescribed now. That is not my opinion. I am not a mass murderer for citing evidence that is published in the Lancet and in the New England Journal of Medicine. And he also added, that was, I think, Dennis, or was it Steve? I can't say now which of the two, that the discussion is so free and we have an opinion to voice. Why don't they recognize or acknowledge that there was an alternative AIDS conference in Vienna just 2 or 3 days ago, and that I was one of the authors of a paper that questioned the drug treatment specifically, that was published in Medical Hypothesis in England last year for 2 months, and then it was censored. It was taken off by anonymous, based on anonymous charges leveled at our paper from AIDS researchers, HIV/AIDS researchers, presented to the publisher Elsevier. They fired the editor, they changed the journal, they censored 2 papers. That's a Nazi move, if you've ever seen one. Okay. That is not free exchange and free debate.
Okay, Denise, did you want to jump in there? Because I'd like to go to Steve. Go ahead, Dennis.
Yes, I'd like to pitch in on a very short thing. AZT is indeed a dangerous drug. We know it. This is something which was used 25 years ago. Then it was decided long ago to go into 3 therapy. No one in his right sense is suggesting to use AZT alone today. It's as if people were suggesting to treat syphilis with arsenic, as was done in the beginning of the century. This is finished. We now have cocktails, we have groups of drugs which have much lower toxicity. We cannot discuss today's situation on the basis of antique type of data which are no longer valid in any way.
Okay, Steve, if I can go to you, I mean, maybe just more of your opinion on the people that you deal with in the industry. What the professor had to say about his paper being censored, taken down, and all of that, and then the problems he had at Berkeley having to be reviewed and all that. I mean, that sounds pretty severe. I mean, if you don't really like what the professor has to say, why don't you just ignore him? But he seems to be constantly attacked. And I'm not defending his position, but maybe just his right to be able to say what he wants. That's why he's on the program.
I think that anyone should be able to say what they want. This is the United States, and that's one of the greatest parts about this country. And, The problem is, as I think that Dr. Brun just referred to, is when you have an extreme opinion that gets attention and it's based on completely obsolete data, it can actually cause harm. You know, Dr. Duisberg was on President Mbeki's advisory council and was one of the real voices that led him to, you know, really decide that HIV didn't cause AIDS and to pull the plug on a lot of programs that could have saved hundreds of thousands of people's lives. That's dangerous. So I think that while people should be able to say these things and be presented, you know, as part of